Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of Gavinsky's Tutorials. Today I'm looking at probably the only MIDI app released this year I can think of offhand that has really genuinely excited me. It's called Mass by a developer called Tom Ward, and it's a pretty unique little sequencer, MIDI sequencer, and modulator actually as well. You can use this to send CC messages. And it creates these evolving interactive musical patterns. So it's got a sequencer aspect and it's got a physics aspect as well, as you can see here. So instead of static step sequencing, Mass uses parts that collide. So here we see this part here, part 1. And if I click here, for example, we're seeing part 2. And we got a whole bunch of stuff we can scroll through here. I'll look at all that in detail later. So we have these different parts and they can collide, they can bounce, they can block each other, and you can generate rhythms and melodies and modulations. So each part acts as its own little mini sequencer. So here's a little sequence for part 2 up there. And then here we're looking at part 14's sequence. So yeah, each part can act as its own little MIDI sequencer, triggering MIDI notes, CC messages to modulate other plugins, transpositions even to change the key or the scale that things are being quantized to here. And we can even generate these things called impulses. This is part of the physics aspect of this. These impulses can make other parts move around without using collisions. It's kind of like an explosion. You can get really deep with Euclidean sequencing and do all sorts of really cool little offsets and stuff. It's a lot deeper than it looks at first glance. I really like using it for creating repetitive, polytempo, minimalist sequences, that kind of thing. Stuff with sort of off-kilter rhythms. Like I think that Dilla, for example, would really like this. And, you know, Philip Glass. It can genuinely do a lot of cool stuff. If you're the sort of person that likes experimenting with melody or rhythm for hours, or if you're the sort of person that likes puzzles, I think you're going to really enjoy diving into this. So this is a sponsored video as well, by the way. So massive thanks to Tom, the developer, for supporting me. As you guys know, if you're regular followers of this channel, in this little niche, ad revenue is almost nothing. So direct support from devs and viewers is really crucial, honestly. But even in sponsored videos, I always give my honest opinion. So there'll be plenty of parts of this video where I criticize things about the app and give constructive feedback. Now, the price of this is $15. And I think that's one of the reasons why there hasn't been much buzz about this app so far. I think another reason is that probably people who didn't get it didn't actually read the manual, and so it really might not have been very clear to people how cool this is. So about the price, like Tom the dev told me he spent thousands of hours working on this, and you know, even just look at like little details like how nice the resizing is, by the way. But this is sort of something that he's been kind of working on over years actually. And although $15 might seem a bit pricey for an iOS MIDI app, I think it's really deep, and you know, you could split that functionality into 3 or 4 little more modular MIDI apps, each one at $5, and nobody would blink an eye. So I think it's absolutely fine value for what it is. So in this video, I'm going to walk you through the main concepts behind the app, help you understand the UI, show you how to get started creating generative sequences, and I'm pretty familiar with this app now. I've spent a few days learning it, working on this video, and making some of my own presets and stuff to just sort of get in my own mind what it's capable of. And I want to mention something about the standalone version, by the way. So as I said, you can use the standalone, and the standalone version has a simple little built-in synth, so you can experiment with it without, needing to send the MIDI anywhere. And one thing that Dev wanted me to mention was it supports MIDI clock, sending and receiving. So for example, you could slave mass to a hardware sequencer sending MIDI clock, or you could, slave it to a desktop app. And then, you could send clock from this to other devices or plugins. So that's a lot of flexibility, I reckon. Okay, so let's dive in. So if we look at the UI, here, this main area is called something like the composer area or something. And this is where you add parts. And it's really, really important to understand something about this. When you look at this, you might imagine that it's something similar to a piano roll. So you might think, for example, that, here we have a note, you might think, for example, and that note happens before this note, right? So, you might think the x-axis represents time. And then you might think, for example, that this part is a higher note than this one. That is not how it works. Basically, the y-axis represents the velocity, and the x-axis represents the note value. We'll look at that in more detail in a minute. So all of the timing information is over here in this section. For example, here we see that part 4, this little part, has a 3-step sequence, and it will trigger on the 3rd step. And then when it triggers, it could generate a note, or it could generate a CC message, or it could generate a message that would make the sequence transpose. It could go up in key, for example, or it could change its scale entirely. You can also send impulses, and it's basically like, imagine an explosion. So this is a way that the physics can work, so that one part can make other parts move even without touching them. So it's not a collision type event, and we'll look at all this stuff in much more detail very shortly. Down here we have this little thing, and this is a little physics sort of XY pad that we can use to make things move. And again, we'll look at that in more detail later. And here we can set up different types of event. So these events are not connected to the sequencer like this event is. Here, these events would be triggered when the part hits a wall, or when the part hits another part. And again, it could be various types of events that get triggered by that. And here we can send out continuous events. We'll look at that later, but mainly you would probably use that for sending out CC messages. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is go through some little presets I made. In some cases, I made them from scratch. In others, they're tweaks of factory presets. And I'll just use these to let you see and hear some of what the app can do before we, get into the details more. So if you see, I called this add another part as an impulse. I just wanted to show you how this impulse thing works. So here I've added a part, and by default, it's sending out a note. It's 4 steps by default, and the first step is going to trigger. The first thing I'm going to do is just change that to make it trigger on the 4th step, and I do that by sliding here. Let me just use my finger. And I don't actually want it to send out a note, I want it to send out an impulse. So I'm going to change this to send out an impulse. So watch now when this triggers. Do you see they started moving? So let me stop the transport again and just see how at the beginning nothing will move, and then when part 6 gets triggered on its step 4, it sends out, it's like an explosion that makes all these other things move. And then it will keep doing that every time it triggers here. Right? So this is one thing you can do. Now here, that part has also been moved, but there are various things that I could do to stop that happening. For example, here I could disable its X and Y axis movement abilities, and now it's just going to send impulses, and it's not actually going to move around or anything. And not that that really matters in this particular example. So here we have another one. This is a tweak of a factory preset. Basic ARP tweak, mainly offsets. So if I tap on something, I can see, if you see here, this is just set as one step and it's triggering every time, and it is going to trigger a note, but I've put this little 1/16th offset here. And you know, here we've got a 14 tick offset. In this, there are 24 ticks in a quarter note. So ticks are very fine little values, and playing around with offsets is one of the really interesting little things that you can do in this app to make up these really quirky little, you know, kind of like, yeah, as I said earlier, sort of Dilla style sequences where you just have all these little notes coming in a bit early and a bit late and all that sort of stuff. So here we can see another thing. So here, this part is, it's immobile there, and that's because here these have been disabled, so it can't move on the X or Y axis. I could change that. So you see now I've enabled the X-axis movement. This one here, now this one is stopping this one from moving. So, you know, there's just like it's really crazy all the stuff you can do. When you first start playing with this app, these are things that you really wouldn't notice. You know, I really read the manual in detail several times. And so that is just constraining this note here. So if we see that note, let's see what it's doing. So it is part 1, and it's just there sending out notes. And I don't think it's sending anything else. No, there are no wall collision, no part collision, no continuous events. So because this is stopping it, it's constraining the sort of ascending note run that it can do here. If I actually grab it and pull it out, you see now it's not being constrained. And it's got a lot more notes that it can generate. This stuff's crazy cool, I think. So call this one cock blocked. So this is just another one with like an immobile mass in the middle constraining the others. And again here, more constraint. So this one is stopping this note from being able to play very high notes. Because remember, here we have lower notes, and as we go across here, we have higher notes. Have a listen. You see, that's a C6. That's a C3. Now we can change all this. So the way it's working at the moment, this one is just stopping this part from playing very high notes. And this part here, let's just make it move. And again, I've disabled the Y-axis movement. So this one is able to play high notes, it's not able to play very low notes. This is super cool, I think. So here, this one, I called it moving freely because I haven't constrained this on any axis, so it's able to move around more freely. So it can also have more variety in its velocity. And so this is, let's just pop into one of the factory presets. So this was extended ARP, was it? Yeah, extended ARP. So in the factory preset, that's just like this. So you can see there's no actual physics stuff going on there. This is just all sequenced. And so here, you know, I'm allowing this one now to move. And so that's just bringing this nice little variety into the ARP as this one changes its notes. And you can see it's not moving very fast. So that's all stuff that we can change using things like its mass and resistance. And when we pull this more over to one side, we're going to get more velocity. So that's got a lot of velocity. If I double tap, I can reset that. Now if I just pull that just a little bit, now we're getting a much slower movement. So, you know, that's what I said earlier, this is just so much deeper than it looks at first glance. So here we just got more parts moving for a more dynamic change of notes. And again here, we're just letting that move around unconstrained. So part 3 direction, part 9 transpose. So here, part 9, the pattern trigger, so every time this triggers, it is making the sequence transpose, and that it is going to transpose the root, not the scale, and that is set up with the x-axis movements. And if we actually tap here, we can see this moving down and up here. So now it's going to start moving up. So look, now it's a C sharp, D sharp, right? Really cool. So this one here is just for modulation. Now I've actually already set that up in another one. So here, this is sending out CC10, and I have set that to control this filter. So CC10 is controlling filter frequency. If you don't know how to do these kind of things, I did a video on AUM, and I explained that sort of stuff in there, and all the basics of AUM. So the way this is at the moment, let's see, let's just bring this over here. So, you know, I can actually like play around with this just by dragging it and stuff, which can be fun. Or, you know, I can use the physics stuff. And again, you know, we can play with things like the mass and resistance. Whoops. So these other ones are just here to create obstacles for this one, to sort of make the physics a bit more interesting. Let me just leave that. Yeah, I don't want to use this one. We go back here for a second. So this is just a slightly busier version of one of the factory presets. Part 6, pattern triggering transpose. So I like this one, yeah. So again, here we have this on the first of these 4 steps, sending a trigger event, and again mapped to the x-axis, so it's similar to what we saw earlier. So this is another one with a bit of a transposing thing going on. So here, parts 10 and 11 are sending a transpose for their trigger events. So this one is set to have an 8-step sequence, and it's sending out a transpose message here on the 5th step. And this one has an 8-step sequence, and it's sending out its transpose message on the 1st step. So what that's basically doing is just making it transpose up and transpose down. So this one's bringing it down each time, and then this one's bringing it up, and that's just because this one is in a lower position on the x-axis. So that's a way of setting things up that you're moving up, moving down, moving up, moving down. So, this is this sort of puzzle aspect of the app that's really interesting. Like, I kind of really enjoy that, having to strategize how to do little things in this. So this is definitely an app that is, if you don't enjoy the journey, if you're just a results-oriented sort of musician, this is not the app for you. This is for people who like experimenting. It's play, And let's face it, almost, very few people using iOS they're doing it for commercial purposes or whatever. Most people are in this for fun. And this does that really well. It's great fun. Sending impulses, other parts movement is limited. So one of these is sending out impulses, and that's just why, if you notice, we're getting things slowing down, and then suddenly they start, moving faster again. Like, look how that slows down. And then basically every 4 beats, it's getting a signal, it's getting an impulse from one of these parts. So these impulses are really enjoyable to play around with. So I want to show you something cool here. I asked Jonathan, the AUM developer, by the way, if it was okay to mention this. I mean, I've seen other people talking about it on the Loopy Pro forum, as it's called now, formerly the Audiobus forum. So it's not a secret. In a future update, AUM will get this feature, which is currently available in the beta version, where you can multiply and divide the clock. So I can just suddenly, make this play at double speed, and it's just this instance of mass that's sending out its MIDI at double speed. It's not, changing the general transport. And here it's going out at triple speed. So that's so cool. So I just did that because I kind of like these at this slightly faster speed. Let's just put it at this. So here I've just got a couple of little very simple examples doing basic, polyrhythmic stuff. So here, this has 3 steps and is triggering on the 1st step. This has 4, it's triggering on the 1st and the 3rd. And we have here this mutate position feature, which is creating little offsets and increasing the offsets as it goes further along to the right. We'll talk about that more later. It's really cool. You can see the same thing happening here. And here we have 5 steps. So, that's what I'm saying. You can just do these really nice little polyrhythmic things, really cool patterns. So it's very easy to just do, little subtle, slightly different tweaks on things with different rhythms. And of course you can, play around with these in real time. And, remember also you can just flick them to move them. And that's different from using the physics part because these are just little one-off movements. When you flick like this, it doesn't actually keep moving. So let's just bring this back down to the normal clock. So if you see here, we sort of have a couple of notes and then a chord. So we can just set it up that we can have chords, by making sure that different notes trigger at the same time. I do just wish we could see from the UI which one is part 11. But okay, look, I've got part 12. I can just slide back here. I mean, it would be uglier if they had numbers on them, so I do kind of understand that choice. Let's just, that's already going with the pad there anyway, yeah. So again, I've disabled the Y-axis movement, but I could enable that and just see what happens. Oops. Sometimes playing around with this pad, it accidentally moves between the parts. That's not what I want. I find that a bit annoying. I'm not sure what can be done about that, but I feel like if I was using this in a live scenario, I'd probably sometimes mess things up. I think it is one of these things that you can get used to. I'm just not really used to it yet. Okay, so let's go in and let me just clear everything by pressing this reset button. And now we'll just look at the basics of building up a little sequence. Okay, so we just double tap anywhere to add a new part. So let me just tap here. So nothing's happening yet because the transport's not running. So let me press play. So we can maybe first go in here and see, if you want to play around with your root note and scale. So let's just keep it C and just pick, I don't know, just a minor scale. Now, I really, really do wish that this had custom scales. I'm getting increasingly annoyed by MIDI apps that just have this sort of random bunch of scales. And I was even joking about it with Tom yesterday. I just said, like, it sort of seems like everybody just, looked at what someone else had put in their MIDI, in their generative MIDI app and thought, okay, well, I'll put those scales as well. But like, it's just so random, I mean, you've got major and minor, and then you've got some modes. But you've got pentatonic. I think at pentatonic major, there's no minor, Then you've suddenly got like an Indian scale and Turkish and whatever. Like, seriously, there should be the ability to choose custom scales, or at least there should be a very long list of possible scales. And, with a search function to help you find them. So that's disappointing. There's room for improvement there. I hope that custom scales get added. So let's just stick with this for now. So back here, again, remember that this is not a piano roll. So watch what happens when I just add another part. So if you see, they are sounding at the same time. So do remember that there's nothing in this part that is related to the time when things trigger. Instead, we do all that over here. So let's add another part. Okay, let's just leave it as this. And so here, let's keep this 4 steps. Let's take this one and make it 3 steps. And let's take this and make it 2 steps. And, or let's make it 5 actually. And so now we could go in and we could change, you know, the trigger position and all that sort of stuff. We could make this one trigger on the second. We could make this trigger on the third. So just using the position slider here. And we could offset these. So if you see here, I'm dragging here. Now I'm going to change this to just have 2 steps, I think. And here what I can do is I can use this mutate function to bring in this second position. And now I could use something like this chance slider to, I'll do it actually in this main part here. I bring this down to about 50. So now each of these only has a 50% chance of firing. Let's add more steps into that. And let's increase that mutate value. Now if we play around with the offsets, we can get some pretty interesting stuff. Now if you remember also what I said earlier, with mutate, when we use offset in mutate, the offset amount increases for subsequent steps. So for example, if the offset value is 11 ticks, this one would be 11 ticks offset by 11. This would be offset by 22. This would be offset by 33 ticks, you know, something like that. This is really a bit of a boring one though. Let me just switch back to one of these ones that I did earlier. So yeah, so a sign that will just let me take, so we're looking at this part 3 here. So if I take position down in mutate here, we go back to assign. Here is set to position 1, so this is just going to trigger when the sequence goes back to the first step every time. And again, mutate here, we could increase this position. So this is using Euclidean algorithms to decide where the step will be triggered among these 5 steps. So assign only ever sets one step, the main step. We can change its position, so will it trigger on the first, second, third, fourth, or fifth step here. We can change its offset, we can set its chance, and then mutate will just allow us to also bring in other triggers here. Again, we can offset them, and that offset amount will increase as these go towards the right side. And here, this is sending a trigger event, so it just means that when this step is triggered, it will send an event. If we don't want it to do that, we just turn this off, and then we see that it's faded out like this. So I'll put it back on again. Now, if I want, I can change that to control. So now it's sending a CC value, and it's set here to send it on CC3. So again, as we saw earlier, I could use that to modulate, parameters in some other app. Unfortunately, can't use it to modulate parameters in this because this is not set up with parameters exposed at the moment. So you could have the y-axis here, for example, sending out values on CC3, and you can set the x-axis up to send out on another CC, right? So physics, again, let's just take a little look at this. So let me trigger this. So I just take this and drag it, and now this will start moving around, and it will start moving those other ones unless we have disabled them, as we looked at earlier. So if I could go in here and I could tap on these to disable those other ones so they can't move. Or we could, just disable the movement of any part on one axis. Now, this sounds a little bit obnoxious. So, remember that you can pull things down to reduce their velocity. So I just want to say, it's difficult to demo some of these things because it's very much experimental, and that is part of the process. Like, when you start playing around with things, you're going to get some things that sound really cool, but you're also going to get some rubbish sometimes. And I mean, that's just part of how these things go. So, yeah, trigger event can be node, it could be CC messages, it could be transpose, as we talked about earlier, it could be impulse. So just again, to look at transpose, at the moment it's set that this will transpose the root, and that will be based on x-axis values, and the scale is not set up to be changed here, but we could set that up. Let's just set it to y-axis, and let's just enable this. So now this is changing the root and the scale. Okay, let me go out of this one into another one. So if we go back to the physics pad, we have this thing here, mass. So if I increase mass, it means, for example, that when this collides with other things, it will knock them more violently, so they will move with faster velocity than they would if this had a lower mass. And you can see that when it has a lower mass, it also, well, it seems to be moving faster right here. But when it knocks into things, it doesn't have as much impact on their trajectory. But if it hits something that has a higher mass than it has, then it will move very fast, right? So, again, all this really interesting physics stuff. Then resistance, if we increase resistance, it will slow down faster. And then maybe it will take, it'll get more energy once something collides with it. And if it just, stops entirely, then just remember you can just make it move again by pulling here. So pull a small amount for gentler movement and pull further to get faster movements. Then here we can set wall collision events. So for example, if I set wall collision event and I set it to send a note, then now when this hits the wall, it's going to send a note value. Like here it would be a C3. You know, if it hits here, that would be a B4. And here it would be a C6. And there it's an A4. Right? So let's just take away its resistance and make it move around. So now you're getting all, you know, these extra notes. And we can turn on part collision events, so that when it collides with another part, we'll also get it making a note event as well. And again, we could change that so that it would send a CC message, for example. So you could use that if you were sending wall collision events or part collision events. It's going to be similar to using a sample and hold LFO, because you're just suddenly getting these very different values being sent. It's exactly like a sample and hold LFO. And again, you know, we could make it do transpose, or we could make it send an impulse. So you see now everything's getting very, very animated, because every time now this touches the wall or touches another part, it's creating an impulse. Now, if here the impulse is set at the moment to just a force of 1. So let's see what happens when I put that up to a force of 60. So you see now it's gone really bonkers. It's like a more violent explosion. And then down here, yeah, just sending CC events now. Well, sorry, I keep saying that, but sending continuous events. So I can make it do really weird stuff. So here it's just sending like a string of notes one after the other. Weird. Could you really use that? I don't know. But it's been left in there just for experimental reasons and maybe for consistency as well. So here's set to just send CC messages, transpose. So that's just, again, you know, kind of crazy, really. But I mean, we could, you know, we could reduce the speed of all that by like increasing its resistance, right? And mass, yeah. So then it would be a lot less crazy. So yeah, so then here we can access the factory presets, and some of those are good. I've already demoed enough presets in this, so I won't go into these. But just note that you have one also here just set up for modulations, and you've got a few other ones here. So these have not been saved inside a folder. But here we have a folder for melodic and modulations. If you you can save your own user presets. So in here in compositions, for example, This is cool. Look, you can make your own folders and give them different names. So that's great. And another thing is that this exposes the presets that you save. The user presets are exposed to the Apple Files system. So if you go into your Files app on your iPad or whatever, you can just search for mass and you'll find a folder that contains those. So it would be very easy to share your presets with other people, or to use other people, other people could share their presets with you. I really wish that all developers would expose their presets to files. So many don't, and it's honestly just very inconvenient sometimes. So yeah, just last thing I wanted to say was, there are other apps that get roughly in this kind of ballpark, like Rosetta Collider or Particles. So those come from the Brambos Rosetta suite. I made 2 videos on those. Those apps are good, but they are dated. They are very limited in what they can do. So it's nice. It's as a whole package, it's nice. But most of those Rosetta apps, they really are getting a bit dated, I feel. So not all of them, but some of them. Almost all of them could do with improvements, really. Then you also have Bounce Bud. Like, this is just not anywhere near capable of doing the amount of stuff that that Mass can do. Mass is really on another level compared to any of those apps, quite honestly. I think this is really good. It's just so fun to play around with. I love that, you have all the polytempo possibilities. I really enjoy playing around with the offsets, and the offsets are so subtle because it's just right down to the level of a tick, which in this is 24 ticks to a quarter note. So, you're really talking about little small offsets. As I've said a few times, that makes this great for doing just these weird little pushing and pulling sequences, very kind of Dilla style. I haven't experimented with this on drums, but you certainly could. Now, by the way, one thing I forgot to mention earlier is every part can send out on a different channel, right? So, you could be controlling like 16 different instruments. I think it's 16 parts maximum. You could be controlling 16 different instruments with this, all sending out on different channels and stuff. Crazy. The physics part is really fun to play around with. As I said, you can do various things. You can have collisions. You can change how things behave by varying mass and resistance. You can use this little directional pad here. You can disable these so you can get all those kind of blocking type movements and stuff to constrain the random events in various ways. And you can do all this transposition stuff, which is really quite fun to play with. You've got your impulses, which are loads of fun, and you can send out CC messages, either continuous or single discrete values that are more like a sample and hold style LFO. I've mentioned various aspects that could be improved. I think definitely, as I said, I'd like to see custom scales, and there are just a few other little things that I've mentioned through the video. But overall, I think it's a well-designed app, and I love the resizing. It really resizes very well. Here, yeah, I don't know if we can view the composition window in that view. But in most of them you can, even as long as you've got a little bit of like x-axis in there, you could still use it really pretty small. So very nice job, I think. All right, everyone, I hope you enjoyed this. And thanks again to Tom, the dev, for sponsoring me. As I said earlier in the video, a sponsored video is paying for my time. My opinion is never for sale. You know, if I get paid to do something, fine. I always give my honest opinions. Same if I have giveaways, whatever. Like, you know, the last video I did on Baby Audio Atoms, I was pretty critical about the app. I had, you know, various giveaways and so on. It doesn't matter. I think that it's very important for me to have integrity. I think that criticism is helpful for everyone. It helps developers make their apps better. At the end of the day, these are just my opinions. Others may not share them. But just again, to emphasize that a sponsored video never compromises quality in any way. It only increases quality because I spend more time on, you know, really learning the apps that I'm making sponsored videos on very well, and so on and so on. So please, if you're a developer, consider sponsoring videos on my channel. It's genuinely really important because the ad revenue from YouTube is so tiny. If you're a viewer, please do support me on Patreon. The size of my Patreon has barely increased over the past few months. I really hope that more people come in. And the thing is, like, anybody who is active in giveaways in my Patreon is getting far more value in apps than they're actually spending on their Patreon membership. So, like, one of them, a guy called Enrique, said, you know, I don't even feel like I'm supporting you on the Patreon. I feel like you're supporting me. So please do take a look at my Patreon if you haven't, and consider signing up. It really, honestly, might make the difference. You know, Patreon subscriptions and more developer sponsorships, it really might make the difference as to whether I can keep doing this channel or not. And I'm not joking. So thank you to everyone who is supporting me. I really appreciate you. And you are honestly potentially making a difference to the future of this channel. All right, everyone. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Take care.